Okay, I think we'll get going and we will, as people can join, can kind of pick things up. Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to tonight's webinar. We at Orienteering Ontario are really blown away by the number of people who signed up for this. I think we had close to 100 people. Super impressed with the number of people interested in mapping. We've got people joining here from all over Ontario, all over Canada, as well as the US, and a few in Europe, I believe. So especially to those, anyone in Europe, thank you for staying up super late. My name is Nevin French. I'm the president of Orienteering Ontario, and my role is just to introduce this webinar and then get out of the way. A little bit of housekeeping. I was going to tell people to stay on mute and off camera, but because we've converted this to a webinar, we have the power to make that happen, so you don't have to worry about that. When we get into question and answer, then we also have the power to unmute you if you'd like to ask your question. Otherwise, you're able to put your question into either the Q&A or into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that. We're hoping this is going to be quite a dynamic back and forth. Both Matt and Jeff have slides that we're going to go through, but please ask questions quite a bit. A little bit about Orienteering Ontario. We're the provincial sport body for the sport of orienteering, and we promote orienteering and adventure racing, and are work with our clubs in Orienteering Canada to promote the sport throughout the province. We'd really like to thank Orienteering Canada for your support of this webinar, including the use of the Zoom here. 2024 for the province is going to be just an incredible year in the woods. That's going to culminate with the hosting of North American and Canadian championships for orienteering this summer, north of Toronto, in Kingston, and north of there in Calabogie. Those are the big events, but all the clubs have a number of really interesting small events and mid-sized events. So there's awesome opportunities throughout the year to get into the woods. One thing we could really use some additional help on the board. So if you're in Ontario and enjoy webinars like this, would love for you to put up your hand. You could be from an orienteering background, an adventure racing background, or just really love being out in the woods. Getting into the webinar tonight. At the core of our sport, be it orienteering or adventure racing, is maps. And these could be really technical maps or of your local university campus. We need quality maps because everyone navigates easier and enjoys their time on a well-made map. No one is going to enjoy being on an outdated map, and that should never be called part of the adventure. We have a couple mappers here, and we need a lot more of them in the province to really create them. Historically, maps have been really hard to make. Growing up in the sport of orienteering, I'd hear all these stories of various sheets of plastic and that sort of thing that mappers would use. Nowadays, with modern technology, it's a lot easier. However, maps are also pieces of art. And when you hear of someone, they draw a map. They don't program a map. And so we have a couple people who, Matt, who's just getting into mapping, and Jeff, who's one of the most experienced in the country. One of the best ways to improve your navigation is to learn how to map and to put your mind into the mindset of a mapper to learn how to interpret terrain. It's a great way to improve your navigating and your racing. And I want to emphasize that tonight is just a very introductory webinar. There's lots of resources out there in terms of improving your mapping and to take your level from A to B and that sort of thing. One of the best ways of learning more is to ask your local orienteering club, your provincial orienteering association or adventure club racing program or anything like that. So you'll see a list of resources or just reach out and ask. So with that, I'd like, I guess, Jeff, if you can start sharing your screen, and I'm going to turn the floor over from Toronto Orienteering Club to Matthew Barrett. And the floor is yours. And I think you can kind of give yourself your own little introduction here.
Thanks, Nev. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, I'm playing the role of the amateur mapper, which isn't a hard role for me to play because orienteering is pretty new to me. I started orienteering in 2019, and if everyone can think back to 2020, that was a very different year for most orienteers. And during that time, I wanted to try to convince my friends or my neighbors, people that were living around me, to go do some runs in our neighborhood. And we didn't have any maps of the neighborhood. So today I'm going to show you some of the tools that I use to create some quick and low quality maps, and kind of get you started on your mapping journey. I took Jeff's course last year, and I think Jeff's going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's a great next step for me. And I am a member of the Toronto Orienteering Club and the Ontario Orienteering Board. Pass it over to Jeff.
All right, so I jumped ahead a little too quick there a second ago. So I started orienteering as a kid. I've been orienteering for on and off for pretty much as long as I've been on this earth. I got to a point where I was actually competing on our national team. I did one World University Champs back a dozen years ago in Switzerland, and a couple of World University Champs. After graduating from university, I was getting more and more involved in a bit of mapping, a little bit of coaching, organizing some events, kind of all as a volunteer. Gradually then started getting paid for a few small things. And over the last 12, 13 years since graduating from university, I have gradually turned that into a full-time career. I started navigation sports about 5 years ago, and have taken on all sorts of interesting projects within the orienteering community. One of the biggest ones I'm involved in right now is as high performance director for Orienteering Canada. So coaching, but also doing a lot of our program admin. And most recently, and my biggest orienteering project or mapping project to date is the 2024 North American Championships project that I'll be finishing up in the spring. That's about a 500-hour project. And I'll get into that a little bit more down the road as to kind of what is involved in that and why a project like that takes that amount of time. So yeah, so Matt's going to start off, talk about a couple of topics here, and then I'll take over with kind of the professional perspective on it and into those really high-end custom orienteering maps. But Matt, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, so just to give you an idea of what's coming up, I'm going to show you two different tools that are online and free to use, that can help you make pretty quickly a semi-decent map. We're going to look into a little bit more details about what's missing using these tools and what's left to be desired. But first, I'll show you how to make a fast park map with the program Open Orienteering Map. And then for the adventure racers on the call, I'll show you how to make a forest map using the Ontario Make a Topographic Map tool. So next slide, Jeff. So the first one, I'm going to take over the screen share in just a sec so you can see me do this on a browser. But there's a tool out there called Open Orienteering Map. It's different than Open Orienteering Mapper, which I think Jeff will talk about later, so don't get those confused. And I'm going to show you how we can make a starting point for a city park in less than 5 minutes. This uses OpenStreetMaps as a data source. So it's really based on what the contributors to OpenStreetMaps have put in there. I found for most kind of city parks and more well-used areas, you'll see a lot of the trails, and I'll show you later that you can pull in things like lampposts and benches and that sort of thing to use those as controls. I found that if you're in a bigger city or if it's a place that gets some use, the trails and the terrain are fairly accurate. Contours are usually hit or miss. It's not editable, so once you create the map, you can't really do much to it. If you see that there's something missing, you're kind of out of luck there. And there's also an easy integration with the tool MapRun. So I use this if I'm traveling for work and I get to a new city and I want to check out a new park in the area. Before I leave, I'll make a quick orienteering map of that park, and then use the MapRun tool to integrate with my phone or my GPS watch to be able to explore a new place. So that's kind of the benefit of this. It's great for kind of your own personal use, and some clubs, we've used it in the Toronto Orienteering Club for Wednesday night trainings, which we do during the spring and summer. But there's a lot of extra tools that Jeff is going to show you that kind of are lacking with this. So I'm going to take over now and share my screen here. Jeff, can you give me a thumbs up that you see my screen? Perfect. So this is oomap.co.uk. And when you get here, you click on this red button for version 4. The developers of this are based in the UK, and if you do end up using this and making some maps, please consider donating. There's buttons down here to do that. I find it really useful, so I think it's worthwhile. I'm going to zoom into an area just west of Toronto here. It's about 10 kilometers along Lake Ontario, called Humber Bay Park, and there's 2 peninsulas that come out into Lake Ontario here. We've used these before for our Wednesday night training, and I'm going to show you how you could create an orienteering map in a few seconds using this. There are different options for what kind of map you'd like to make. I find the pseudo O looks the nicest to me. There are also contours. Depending on where you are in the world, some of these contours will work better than the others. The SRTM ones are from a satellite scan of the Earth, so that should work anywhere. I found for Eastern Ontario, the LiDAR that comes from the Ontario LiDAR has been loaded into here, but not Western Ontario and Central Ontario. So in this case, SRTM is a better choice. You can also select a specific scale, choose what size of paper you want, and choose if you want portrait or landscape. And then once you've got that, you can click on where you want the center of the map to be, and you see a box is drawn around it. That's where the borders will be. If you're not happy with that, click and drag till you get all the terrain that you'd like to see. In the top right over here, you have some options to add in the event date, change the title of the map. I'm going to change. And if you're just looking to make a base map, that's all you need to do. You click save and get PDF map, and with that you'll be able to download it generates the map and saves it. You can save it as JPEG. You can also save it as a KMZ file, which lets you import it into MapRun. Another thing that you're able to do with this is you can switch satellite view on and off. That will help you if you're wanting to use this program to also make checkpoints. And once you've got the map area selected, you can click on the map and start adding checkpoints this way. So if you're wanting to do it as a training for yourself or for your club, that's a good way to start. There's some kind of interesting tools that are in here. Again, this is from Open Orienteering OpenStreetMaps. So you can see, for example, I want to see all of the lampposts in the area, and that will retrieve that from OpenStreetMaps, and I can select these lampposts, for example, and use them as my controls. Just by clicking on them, I think that should come up. You're also able to add controls as you go. I'm going to add one there, and it will show up over here. You can add description of what it is. So I'm going to shift back to, actually, Jeff, can you shift back to the presentation? I've got an example of that park, and we're going to take a look at what's left to be desired using Open Orienteering Map. So as you can see, that's what it looks like from satellite view. And I think the next slide puts them side by side, Jeff. Oh, nice fade in. There you go. And one more slide zooms into the eastern peninsula there. Perfect. So this gives us a look at what's actually there in our satellite view on the left, and then what our easily quick and dirty open orienteering map looks like on the right. And you can see that the trails are fairly well drawn out. You see that some of the trails are paved and don't show up as paved in the map. There's also some bridges in the ponds kind of north and south of that, oh, perfect, north and south of that parking lot, which don't show up on your map. So you'll be surprised that you can cross using these shortcuts when you're out there in real life. Also, the contours look very funky on this map. There's contours that just go into Lake Ontario and don't really make sense when you're looking at it. It's a very flat area, so not a big deal. But yeah, this gets you a quick map that you could use maybe if you're wanting to host something at a school, or if you're trying to do something for a scouts group or a Girl Guides or something like that, and you want to have a quick and easy way to start, and you're not really caring about international quality specifications. This could be something for you to use. Jeff, you can go forward to the next one. What I find, this is an example of a forest map. So before I was showing you a city park that had a lot of OpenStreetMap details, trails, benches, lamps, that sort of thing. Here is an area just east of Bon Echo Provincial Park. So you can see the top left of this map in green is Provincial Park, Bon Echo Provincial Park land. And this is an area of crown land, so it's publicly accessible for leisure activities. I've been here before mountain biking, and using open orienteering map, you can get decent contours, water features, you can get the main roads that are in this area. It really lacks in terms of trails, vegetation density. If we look at this, I'm going to show you in a sec, looking at this later, there's very different kind of forest vegetation. And we're also missing point features such as boulders or distinct trees, that sort of thing that you would normally expect to see on an orienteering map. So instead of using open orienteering map for this, especially if you're in adventure racing and you like to do, like to have something that looks like these topographic maps, I'm going to suggest using the Ontario Make a Topographic Map tool. It's pretty quick and easy to make a topographic map. You have labels for elevation and different locations. So the lakes in this are labeled, the roads in this map are labeled. You can extend to a huge area. So if you're wanting to do a multi-day trip or something, you could zoom yourself out. One of my biggest complaints is the scale options in this tool are very strange, and I'll show you that in just a sec. Also, there's no correction for magnetic declination, which could be good or bad depending on if you like to do that as part of your training. And one thing I would suggest is to combine this with the Ontario Crown Land Atlas to find where there's that Crown Land public available use land, to see where you are permitted to access and explore. And I'm going to share my screen again and show you how to create one of those. Okay, so this is the Ontario Make a Topographic Map tool. I'm going to show you for that location just east of Bon Echo. This is Bon Echo over here, and the area around Shabanika Lake. There's some nice trails there. You pretty much just zoom to where you'd like the map to be created. Switch over to markup and printing, click print, and you have a few different options to choose what the scale you'd like. And you can see the scale here, very funky. So get whatever one looks the best to you. You can also add text. For example, if you want to meet your friend at this hill, you can say meet here, and then it adds it as text. And if, for example, you want to show that there's a trail that goes around this lake and connects to this creek over here, you can add that. And then when you press print, it will create that map for you with whatever annotations you added. Again, with the weird scale, not the typical scale bars that you're used to using. So those are two tools to create maps that are very quick. I think there's a lot of value in using that to make maps, not for big events, because I'm sure some orienteers out there would see what's missing and get upset with you for submitting that as a map. So I'm going to pass it off over to Jeff, and he's going to show you the right way to do things. Oh, I think there's one more slide that is in there for mine, actually, Jeff. Yeah, so don't forget that if you possess or create a map, it doesn't imply permission to access that location, especially for private land or that sort of thing. Off-trail activity is often a sensitive topic in provincial parks or city parks. Be aware of your local rules before you go and get someone upset with you for doing orienteering. And also, especially for the backcountry maps, tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. We don't want you to get lost out there. All right, and Jeff, you can take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Actually,
That was
before that, just a couple comments there in the chat. Matt, do you want to, Matt or Jeff? Question there from Justin Feaster. Were the maps created with open orienteering map and or the topo map adjusted for a magnetic declination?
So the open orienteering map does automatically let you automatically adjust for declination. There's a small icon in the top right of the mapping page that lets you turn that on or off, but that's by default on. So it's already adjusted, just rotated to whatever the local declination should be. And then the Ontario topographic maps, I do not believe it is adjusted for magnetic declination.
And also want to flag, Michael Raz has put an excellent post in there in terms of using additional programs like Purple Pen to put on courses and that sort of thing, and as a link to a website. So recommend taking a look at that post as well.
Yeah, thanks, Michael.
Okay, Jeff, on to you. And again, if people have questions in either the chat or the Q&A, thank you, Matt, for that. It's just fascinating how quick and easy some of those maps can be created. Okay, Jeff.
all right. Thanks, Evan. I just want to reiterate, I've got a whole bunch of slides prepared, but I'm happy to take questions kind of as we go if they're relevant to that section of the presentation. Or we can go back and take some questions at the end. I do want to start. We're on the sort of the professional side of it. And one of the questions or comments that comes up the most, I think, and Matt and Evan, you can chime in here. But what I hear is kind of surprise at how expensive orienteering maps can be. And so I wanted to start with that comment there and then kind of work backwards a little bit from that to clarify that point. So when we're talking these orienteering maps, you know, I'm talking about something like for our North American Championships or Canadian Championships, where we're talking, you know, large complex areas, and there's a lot of manual field work and manual drawing that goes into making these maps. So we're talking about up to 3,000 Canadian per square kilometer, and a map could be up to 6 or 7 square kilometers. You know, even larger maps, sometimes they're a little bit less common now, but you used to see maps 10, 12 square kilometers of terrain. So you could be looking at easily $20,000 to $30,000 for a big mapping project. Smaller maps that you might use for some events could come out to more like 1,500 or 2,000, but you're still looking at in the thousands of dollars there. Price obviously is based on area, but also the complexity of the terrain and the physicality of the terrain, because it's a lot of manual work going through the terrain there, and also, you know, how many features, how many things do you have to draw on that map? The more there are, the longer it's going to take to produce. So my intention here is to kind of show a little bit my process, but also to talk through a little bit what you might expect if you're hiring someone to have a map made, or if you want to do it yourself, touch a little bit on some of the skills that are involved. So that's my intention here. I know we've got folks that are listening in with a variety of backgrounds and experience. and wanting to get some different things out of this talk tonight. So that's where I'm coming from. So to start here, and then we'll dive into some of this, we have our process that I've broken down into 10 full stages here. So the first two, you have to find the area that you want to have mapped, and you need to get permission to A, use it for an event, but B, to actually be there to do the mapping, because you do need to go on site to do a proper orienteering map with that full field work process. Once you have the area, you've defined what area you want to use, you need to go about collecting your base material, preparing that, so that is that data collection and processing. That's a term that I'll use throughout my presentation. And then next our drawing of our contours and other info from that base material. So this is before you actually go out and do that field work. You do what you can from the desk. And then we go out and we do that field work and we do that final drawing. That's where I'm going to focus on, those three sections for the most part. And then there's a course setting piece, an actual map layout. So putting in your title, your scale, a border, making it look nice type of thing. And then I do want to touch on very briefly here that the printing process is a really important part of the map making process. When you're making an orienteering map, you are making a map that people are going to use as a printed product. And it's important to consider that when you're drawing your work and making sure that it's going to be something that is going to be usable to the final orienteer. It might look good on a screen, but if you print it out at the right scale that people are going to be using it at, and it's not readable, that's what matters more than what you see on the screen, right? Because the people that are using your map are using it in a printed version. So you do need to consider that as you're drawing it. And then of course the actual printing, you can go and print it on a home printer at your desk, or you can go and you can get it professionally printed, and that's going to make a big difference to the experience of the folks using your map, right? So if we look at primarily those three, well, I guess it's 5 sections there that I've kind of collected into 3: data collection and processing, pre-field work, and map drawing, and then the field work and final drawing. You can take your full championship caliber maps. You're going to go through all of those processes. But there's also kind of a product that you can take where you don't do that field work. You just do as much as you can from the desk, and oftentimes it's somewhat usable. It's still going to be a big step up from what Matt was showing with the open orienteering map and the topo map, because you're actually doing some of that hand drawing. So for many uses, that's a perfectly valid kind of step to stop. Or you can do what I've called here on the right, the non-hand drawn map. So I've collected all my data. I've pulled in from different data sources, and I can pause it there, and I can say, okay, here's something that I can use. And this is perfectly valid for maybe, if you're wanting to go out with a bunch of friends on the weekend, or you're looking at a new area, you want to say, okay, is it worth investing in getting a properly done map here? Well, I'm going to just do that data collection and processing portion of it. Go out and go and spend an afternoon out there to kind of see what the area looks like. So those are the kind of the different steps that I'm gonna go into in more detail. But before I do that, I just want to really highlight here that this is more representative of the cost and the time that goes into this. The vast majority of the time that goes into a championship caliber map is that field work and that final drawing. And then the pre-field work map drawing section, and then the data collection and processing really is a fairly minimal chunk of that time. And of course, if you're hiring someone to do this, the prices are going to be priced accordingly. For that non-hand drawn map, that's pretty quick to turn out. And then as you go further through this process, you're going to get kind of exponentially more expensive, because that time going into it is a lot higher, and the expertise involved and the knowledge to do that increases greatly as well. So in terms of time, I've mentioned this a bunch. We're looking at anywhere from kind of 30 to 80 hours per square kilometer for the fieldwork and final drawing. The 80 is really on the high end. Or if you've got a steep area on a big ski hill, let's say, with a lot of rock detail, some cliffs, where the 30 hours per square kilometer you might find for a much flatter area, you know, more like a city park type of thing, you can be looking at more like that 30 hours. This is mostly going to be for forest maps. Sprints, the numbers are a little bit different for the university campus and that kind of thing, but that's generally what we're talking about. Pre-field work map drawing, 5 to 15 hours is a good ballpark for most forest maps. Again, sprint maps, that number tends to go way up and the field work tends to go down a bit. And then we're looking at kind of anywhere from 2 to 10 hours to collect, to find and collect and process all that data. And I've drawn in some numbers here for the hand-drawn maps and the non-hand-drawn maps as well. And you see the numbers have shifted a little bit, because if I'm creating a map that I know is not going to get any field work, I'll maybe do more drawing in that pre-field work stage to get the map to a little bit of a higher level. It might not be something that I would do if I'm doing the field work, because I would risk wasting some time in drawing things that I can then go and see, and I can just do it in the field work step. So I'm pulling it into that pre-field work step if I know I'm not going to go out and do that field work. So I mentioned kind of I can stop that map at a variety of stages. And the next few slides here, I'm going to go through some examples. So this is a piece of terrain that's actually just like a 6-minute drive down the road from where I'm living here in Kingston. It's a great, interesting little area with a lot of mountain bike trails. And this version of this map is straight from Open Orienteering Map. So what you saw Matt working with earlier this evening. And you can see there's the stream, there's a lot of trails. You can see there's some field area, some white. And we'll go through these different versions. So this next version here is what I would call the non-hand drawn map. So I've pulled in data from some free Ontario LiDAR data, some OpenStreetMap data, and I've taken some time to lay it out a little bit. And you can see that I've got my logo on there. I've got you know, my name. I've got some copyright notices, and then the contour interval and that kind of thing. So there's a couple of differences here. Because I'm importing from the LiDAR data, I'm starting to see a little bit of vegetation green in this kind of section of the map here in the bottom left. You'll notice if I go back on the slide here, that's all shown as yellow, whereas the LiDAR shows me a more accurate picture of that vegetation. And the contours have changed here. And this is a question from Iona. Because I'm using a different source of data for the LiDAR and they're processed in a different way. And so this is the key difference, that this map here from Open Orienteering Map, you can pull it up and you can generate that in about 10 seconds. This is still an automated process, but I have to go and find my source, because I'm not just pulling from one data source, but I'm going and looking for the best LiDAR data source. And then I've got more sophisticated algorithms to generate those contours at 2.5 meters here. Right? But you can see that the contours and the marsh, or the trails and the marshes are still the same. They're actually drawn from the same source. So my next version of this is still basically that non-hand drawn, except I've taken, in this case, about an hour and a half per square kilometer to just touch up the most relevant pieces here. And you can see along the stream on the left side, I've drawn in some vegetation pretty quick. It hasn't been field checked, but it makes a big difference the way the stream is drawn and the marshes are drawn there to there. You can see that there's a significant difference. So that's just kind of maximizing a few hours to touch up a map. And then I can go in and I can do the detailed actual pre-field work drawing. And now I've drawn in, this is now 5-meter contours instead of 2.5. And you can see that the contours are much smoother drawn. And I've drawn in a ditch there. I've drawn in some form lines. And I've really taken the time to smooth out some of the trails. I've also added in a few trails that I could see from some different data sources, right? So that compared to that, there's a few more trails. But I will note that that is a small percentage of the trails in this particular area. So this is a version of the map that has been more or less fully field checked. I haven't done the southeast side of the river, but on the northwest side of the river there, I've drawn in all of the vegetation as it actually appears. So if we compare that back to the original version that we saw there, all of that green area was shown as open field, but it is decidedly not. And there is a complete rat's nest of trails through here, where the mountain bikers have had a bit of an unregulated field day in just creating trails up and down that slope there. So you can really see the time goes into this, but the quality of the final product that is being created goes up exponentially. I've carefully taken the time to draft this so that everything is as readable as possible. You know, there's all these little black dots that represent stony ground. They're not overlapping the trails. And that takes a lot of time to do all of that manually, but it's going to create a product that you can read while you're on the run, right? At a championship style event. So to go back, I'm just gonna cycle back through this. So this is our pre-field work version, and then we have our kind of no hand or minimal manual drawing version, our no manual drawing version, and then the version from Open Orienteering map. So you can really see that progression as we go through. And now I want to shift gears slightly from the product to what goes into making that product. So in that data collection and processing stage, where this really differs from Open Orienteering map or the Ontario Topo version is, well, a few things, but one is taking the time and having the knowledge of where to look for that data, and finding the kind of the best, most detailed data source to use, and then actually processing that and having the knowledge to use those tools to process that and collecting that data. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's not a point and click. It's one step up from that, but it is using some various tools to pull all of that data together from different sources, and creating a properly georeferenced map that you can use with GPS, yeah, using a variety of things for that. So then in the next step, we're talking about the pre-field work map drawing. So here what we're doing is we're going to take our LiDAR data, which is really just a bunch of XYZ points collected from flying a plane or a drone over the area, and turning those XYZ points into some smooth contours. So there's a variety of tools and algorithms and processes out there that will generate the contours that we saw in the first versions of my map and what Matt was producing. But in this step, we're really taking that and we're going to use that and draw in the contours by hand to as accurate, or not as accurately, but as effectively as possible, represent the shapes that the actual the folks out there orienteering are going to see when they're standing in the forest. As of yet, there are no AI systems, no software packages that can do that as effectively as an experienced mapper drawing those contours from hand. And there's a lot of other details that we can draw in as well. Cliffs, there's some techniques to find boulders, root stocks, down to trees and some of that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of knowledge and skill that goes into interpreting those and using the tools to smoothly draw and effectively draw those contours and such. And then, of course, another part of this is knowing and using the International Orienteering Federation's specifications. There's a few different specification documents that the International Federation has that specify how contours should be drawn, what features should be shown, what shouldn't. Those are each about 40 to 50 pages long, roughly speaking. And there's a lot of detail in those, and learning how to interpret those and then apply those is a big piece of this too, right? So a lot of skill and knowledge and experience built up. So this is some of what you get when you process that LiDAR. So this is the contours themselves. I'm also looking at this layer here, which is a hillshade. It's you can kind of see the terrain a little bit in there. I won't go into a lot of detail on this. I do have a class that I'll be teaching later in the winter where we will go through this. So if you're interested in learning more, there is that opportunity. And a couple of other things. I've now combined it with the contours here. So these are some of the ways that I'll go through this LiDAR data when I'm working on this step of creating a map. This shows the vegetation height. So the yellow and orange is open. In this case, a lot of lakes and marsh, but also some patches of kind of hilltop ridges with some Canadian Shield rock. And then the white and the green is open forest. And now I've combined this again with some other stuff, putting it all together here, and a few other things. So this is what they call the intensity image. It's just, again, another way of looking at that data. And in this case, you can really see the black sections are lakes. You can see the marshes down in the bottom, where it's open water in the bottom left. You see it as black, and then where it's marsh with various reeds, it's the different colors. So you can see some of that information in different ways in this data. From there, once I've drawn that map, I'm going to go into the field work and the final drawing step here. And so this is where the bulk of the work in a kind of a custom championship caliber map gets done here. So there's a few steps. They're not necessarily done in this order. They kind of fit together, but there's the field survey and the field drawing. So I'll go out one day, and then maybe that evening or maybe the next day I'll go and draw what I was surveying, and I'll go back and forth for whether it's a couple of weeks or a couple of months on a bigger project, doing that. And as I'm going along, I'm also editing, and I will go back and revisit and resurvey some of that area. I think it's really important to recognize that just like any published product, whether it's a book or a movie or a TV show or a engineering report or whatever it is, it's really important that your first draft is going to be a first draft. And to create the highest caliber maps, you need to be prepared that the work that you create, the first draft, is not perfect. You have to accept that, and you have to take the time to revise that to get the best quality possible. So that, of course, takes extra time and therefore increases the cost, but I can tell you it is well worth it. I have a really good example of that on the next couple of slides. But first, I just want to touch briefly, again here, what goes into this step as a professional mapper. It really key to really know your IOF specification documents. They include not just the standard definitions and symbols, but also there's a lot of detail in there on minimum symbol sizes. So if you've got a little patch of green vegetation, they don't want you drawing it on the map so small that nobody can actually read it. And so there's a whole stack of different minimum sizes for different symbols. Similarly, minimum gaps and various other details. Of course, you need experience just doing the field survey. This is stuff that takes practice. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. And similarly with the actual drawing, being aware of kind of what I call the concepts of prominence and prioritization. So if I'm out in the field and I see two cliffs there, I want to prioritize on the map the one that is more prominent in the terrain. So I've got two cliffs, one's a lot smaller than the other. I want to make sure that the map accurately represents that, and I'm not just putting both cliffs in with the same symbol, but that the one that's bigger, I'm going to draw it bigger, I'm going to use a bigger symbol. I'm going to find a way to make sure that the prominence on the map reflects the prominence in the terrain and vice versa. So that I can, when I get out into the terrain and I'm reading the map, I can know that, hey, that one's bigger. I can expect that to be the one that I'll see as bigger and see first in the terrain. So here's a big project I did a few years back in Gatineau Park, just on the Quebec side of the river, north of Ottawa. And this is my first draft. there'll be a few things in here where I drew it a couple of times, even for this first draft. But this is really my first draft of the quote unquote finished first draft. Let's call it that. And you can see there is a ton of rock everywhere, which accurately represents the terrain for any of you that have been in some of the terrain in Gatineau. You know how rocky it is. But I got some feedback from a fellow orienteer, Eric Kemp, who looks at a lot of my maps. I look at a lot of his too. We have a great partnership in that way, and kind of holding each other to account and making our maps better. Ultimately, I went back and I redrew it to this. So I think it's hopefully fairly obvious that this is a lot. I'm going to use the term cleaner than the version before. There's a lot less of the black dots. I've changed some of the contours. So you can see particularly in kind of this section here, I've changed the contours significantly. And as part of that process, I shifted the contours through most of this section as well. But this really more represents how subtle that area is. I shifted those contours up and down to really represent the terrain in a different way. And I'm not just drawing it straight at the 5 meter interval where my LiDAR contours show it, right? They'll show kind of a strict 0 meters above sea level, 5 meters above sea level, 100 meters, 105 meters. But I've stretched some of that to make more intuitive sense to the orienteer. And that's where a lot of time, knowledge, experience goes into how do you do that well. And I've also taken my stony ground, and I've really, instead of kind of accurately showing where all the stony ground is everywhere, I've really just highlighted the densest stony ground, the part where it's hardest to run, the part where you're quite frankly most likely to roll an ankle, and kind of left all of the middle medium stony ground off of the map, because it was really just obfuscating a lot of that other detail. So just quickly here, you can see the two versions overlaid over each other, and you can kind of see where some of those differences are, right? And another piece that I really want to highlight here is the concept of really careful drafting. So this is a piece. It's actually on the southern part of that map in Kingston that I was showing, where there was all those trails. But it also highlights the editing process. So on the top left here is the first quick version of this. It's a train bridge with a major stream, creek going under it. And you can pass on the west side of that creek. You can pass under that train bridge. But there's a lot of black lines from trails touching the bridge lines, touching the edges of the creek. So I've taken a couple of attempts here at how do I clean that up so that I can really see each important piece. So on the top right, for example, you can see that I've cut all the black lines back, the trail, the edges of the creek. I've cut those lines back. This little form line here, I've cut back as well so that you can really clearly see that bridge. And then I've put this gray underpass symbol there to show that you can get underneath. I also tried on the bottom left, I tried a different version where there's this purple, it's a crossing point feature, and ultimately still a little bit confusing. And so I actually posted this to a Facebook forum of orienteering mappers, which anybody who's interested in getting into mapping, I highly suggest you find that particular group. Lots of folks asking questions all the time. And this bottom right version was suggested to me, which I really liked. And so I've adopted that. So again, you can see that process of iteration, of going through multiple drafts, but also that concept of really, okay, how do I draw this not just most accurately, but most legibly to show that crossing point, and to see all the different pieces that you need to see in this little complex area, right? So that's a key thing that can differentiate you know, a map that you might use for North American Championships, compared to something that you know, somebody with less experience might make, and you might use for just a local training or event, right? That's one of the things that can really elevate a map. So that's all that I have prepared. I could spend hours and days talking about some of this stuff, but this is really just a primer. And you want to learn more, there's lots of resources out here. I believe these slides will be made available. These are all links, and you can go and find links to the various softwares that get used, some various resources, and also the international mapping specs. Matt, Nevin, did you want to add anything on this?
Just a quick thing, and if people want to put in questions into the chat or the Q&A, this is a great time to do that. And I want to second Jeff's comments in terms of asking questions to the mappers community. I look at the threads on Attack Point and on the Facebook mapping group, and it's really impressive how someone will pose a challenge and the number of different interpretations. And I think it goes back to that kind of artwork aspect of it in terms of what is the right balance. And I liked how Jeff discussed in terms of the decisions in terms of what to put on the map, how to map it, that it's not just everything in the terrains on the map. You need to have that interpretation to allow someone who's using the map to really, you know, really interpret the terrain. I think also the comments Jeff made in terms of the framing of presentation and layout on the map and that sort of thing is really important. Jeff, do you want to give just a quick summary of some of the courses that you have upcoming?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nevin. Yeah, so as has kind of been hinted at, I not only make orienteering maps, but I've started over the last couple of years getting into actually teaching how to make orienteering maps. There are so few of us doing it, and it is such a fundamental part of our sport that we really need more folks doing it, both at a serious professional level, but also as a hobby. It can be great fun. It can be super rewarding. Even if you're not intending to make any money at it, you just want a little project that you can dabble at on the weekends. One of my favorite parts of orienteering mapping is that you always get that feedback as you build the map piece by piece. You can always see your progress, right? At the end of every day, you've added more to the map. The map gets better every time you go out. And I know a lot of folks enjoy the mapping side of it as much as they enjoy the actual going out and participating in an event, largely for that reason. And it gives you a chance to get outside and spend some time in nature as well. So I am strongly supportive of anybody who's wanting to get into it. I've got a number of courses this winter on Wednesday evenings. So I've got them up on my slide here, starting with the starting a map project a week from today, and then going into using Open Orienteering Mapper, one of the software packages that gets used that I think Matt touched on, mentioned briefly, and laying out your map as well. And then we get into some of the LiDAR stuff and contour drawing in February, later in February and in March, slightly more advanced. And feel free to reach out to me, Jeff at navigationsports.ca, if you have any questions, or you can go to my website, navigationsports.ca, go to the courses page, and you can find information there and sign up directly there if that's something of interest to you. So I know these some of the events.
One question from Kim in the chat there. Do you find Google Earth useful for that first at-desk version?
So yeah, Kim, it really depends on the project. If I'm doing a city park or I'm doing a sprint map, absolutely. I'll use Google Earth, Google Maps, Street View quite a lot, and do a lot of the work from there. Typically, if I'm doing a wilderness area, forest area, there's a lot less that you can get from that. And there's a lot more that you can get from the LiDAR on the flip side of that. But if you've got tree cover, your Google satellite view or Google Earth is not really going to show you what's underneath the trees.
Matt, have you used that in terms of some of your projects?
I haven't really used Google Earth before. As Jeff was saying, using Google Street View, especially for fixing a park map or trying to see what's changed over the years, is really useful. But yeah, having the LiDAR really gets you going, really gets you started. And we didn't touch on that today, but if you're in Ontario, there's a map that shows the areas with publicly available LiDAR. One of the links in the previous slide shows you how to get to that. So if you're interested in seeing if your area has had LiDAR flown, you can go to that. You have to put in a request to get that data. It's just a quick email that you send off to, I think, Land Information Ontario. And then with that point cloud LiDAR data file, you can start doing some of that processing that Jeff showed to get you the hill shading and the contours and vegetation, that sort of thing.
Great. And that's Kim's just put a comment that the good people at NRCan have just released a lot of LiDAR. Kim, is that what provinces is that through? Because certainly we've seen here in Southern Ontario, a couple months ago now, there was a major release with some filling in a lot of the gaps in Southern Ontario around that. That'd be great if that's other provinces as well. Wanted to flag something that if you're in an area that there isn't an orienteering club presently, please reach out to Orienteering Ontario. And if we get a few people from a certain area, we'll happy to connect you. And it may be an area that there's historically orienteering there, and or if not, we'd love to work with you in terms of getting some maps into action.
I think there's a couple more, or maybe one more advertisement slide before we get too deep into the questions.
Thanks. I'll jump in and cover this. So the slide before had some upcoming Ontario events. And then the big ones this summer that I mentioned, that we have the Canadian Orienteering Championships taking place north of Toronto in a place called Mansfield. Midweek sprint races in Kingston, and then the North American races in a place called Calabogie, west of Ottawa. Jeff's the mapper for North Americans, and you'll have to read the upcoming bulletins to find out more about the terrain. But there's been a few pictures posted, and terrain looks absolutely stunning out there. And also for Canadians in the Mansfield area, it was out there this summer. Really, really nice, open, interesting technical terrain. And Jeff, I don't know, in Kingston, where you're currently, we didn't really talk much about sprint mapping, but can you touch on in terms of the technical elements of those races this summer?
Yeah, I need to be careful not to give anything away. But a variety of areas in Kingston. We've got some city park along the waterfront. We've got the old Kingston Penitentiary. Going to be a super interesting area for the individual sprint. There'll be actually, I think, a chance to run inside that old pen. And then also a knockout sprint, a relatively new format. And I think this will be the first time knockout sprint will be held as part of the North American Championships on the Queen's University campus. Beautiful old campus, and should be a really good venue for that. And have a good crew as well, course planning for that, with Andrew Cornett and Stefan Bergstrom being involved in that. And having got a little bit of practice over the last couple of years in hosting that in preparation for that event. So really interesting lineup of some very different but still quite technical orienteering in Kingston.
Excellent. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay. Continuing, any questions here at the end? There, a few of them have been asked and answered.
There's another comment from Michael Raz saying that the guy who handles Open Orienteering Map will add LiDAR to the app if you ask him and let him know where it is, which is how the Ottawa LiDAR got in there. I didn't know that. That's great to know. Thank you, Michael.
Okay. Let's see. I think that looks to be it for questions. And
Evan, I
with
think
that,
there was a
oh,
couple of questions. There was a couple of questions submitted in advance.
oh yes, okay.
So I don't have those pulled up. I'm actually gonna.
One of them was more or less from me, and that was basically in areas that, especially around rock, handling areas that are really heavy, flat rock, and in a normal area that would be a lot of gray. How do you make those calls in terms of specific area like that? Another might be like semi-open, to make those kind of calls.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. It's a bit of a hard one to answer. And it takes a lot of experience. I think most newer mappers tend to put too much on the map. And I mentioned the concept of priority and prioritization and prominence. And I would go back to that as kind of a fundamental principle here. So if I'm coming up to an area and I see a whole bunch of rock, a whole bunch of boulders. I'm going to ask myself, okay, when I first came into this area and I first saw all of those rocks, what came to mind? Did I see 3 individual boulders, or did I see an area with a bunch of rock? If the answer is I see an area with a bunch of rock, I will map it as such. And so I will use these boulder these black triangles that show a boulder field. Or if they're a bit smaller, maybe I'll use some rocky ground, the little black dots. If my answer to that is I see a big boulder with some small stuff, but that one big boulder is what I see, then I want to show that big boulder, and then maybe show with some smaller symbols, some other symbols, I'll show that there's some other stuff going on around it. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Evan?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of that, does that also include in terms of that you're going through it, you're not just standing saying exactly like imaging what you see right there, but also that idea of say moving through that terrain and needing to be able to navigate through that as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really differentiates again that really top level championship caliber map that somebody like Eric Kemp, some of our national team athletes that have competed at world champs, you want to create an orienteering map that is going to work for the way that they do orienteer and that people should be striving to orienteer, which is they're not looking at the things that are right next to them. They're looking as far ahead in the terrain as they can, and they're looking for what they see as far ahead as possible. And so as a mapper, you want to get into that mindset a little bit and say, okay, not what there's this boulder beside me, does it meet that 1 meter threshold, which is the kind of the minimum threshold for a rock to put on the map, but at least as relevant is when I'm approaching that boulder from a distance and I first come up to that boulder first enters my view, what do I see there and how do I represent that, as opposed to just when I'm standing beside it, right? And it's really easy as a novice orienteer to say, okay, I stand beside it, I measure how high it is, should it go on the map or not? It's a lot more abstract to think, okay, from a distance, what do I see and how do I represent these things? And so that takes a little bit more experience. But as you gain that experience, that's what you want to be moving towards, of kind of mapping things from a distance and not just mapping the things that are right beside you.
Does that tie in with things like what we would call nowadays adventure running maps, or back in the day, kind of more of a Rogaine map, which when you're mapping those, the scale may be say 1 to 20, and having to really determine what is going to be on those maps?
Yeah, I would say it's a very similar concept, maybe at a slightly different scale, right? When you're at a 1 to 20, you can't put as much information on the map. And I know that in those contexts, people aren't expecting as much on the map either. And you're covering a much larger area. You're often covering, 30 square kilometers of terrain. And if you were to spend the same amount of time on that, I mean, that would be $100,000 project, right? And so you want to be doing that as a $5,000 project. You're going to naturally have to move a little quicker and be more selective as to what you're working with, right?
Great. There was a question that we had before on our forum. In terms of you as a professional mapper, what do you look for in a client? Are they serious about valuing your skills and that sort of thing? Can you tell a bit in terms of the mapping projects that you take on?
Sure. It's an interesting question, and kind of from a different perspective. So I actually really appreciate that question. So what do I look for in a client? I guess part of it is that is somebody that's willing to pay what I'm charging. I think there's a tendency to, as we started off this conversation about, people are surprised at how expensive they are. And I'm making maps that could be used at a North American Championships. And that's the caliber that I'm doing, and that's the time that I put into it. And I'm not prepared to take shortcuts. And so I charge for that. And the reason I'm not prepared to take shortcuts is, well, partially it's my personality, that I want to create the best product possible, but it's also, if I start doing some of my projects at a lower quality, that's not fair to the clients that are counting on my reputation as a mapper to attract participants, right? In North American Championships, it's a draw. I think that I hope that that it's a map that I have done. My maps have developed a bit of a reputation. And so it wouldn't be fair. I'd be undercutting that reputation for myself, but also for those clients that are those other clients that have those good maps that I've made. If some of the maps that I make are not to that same standard. So really, there's an expectation there, that people understand that I'm not going to take those shortcuts. That's one of the big things. And then the other thing for me is of course it has to fit into my schedule. Right. And I'm not mapping is not the only work within orienteering that I do. I'm doing some coaching in the summer. So I've only got so many hours. And I'm also not willing to spend 8 months of the year working these remote projects. Right. So I select based on that a little bit as well.
You actually, both of you guys can jump in terms of seasonal maps, in terms of what time of year do you map? Do you ever take into account to how the map may look at different times of the year?
Also, I guess I can start this one off, which is to say, I will work, as long as there's kind of no snow on the ground and it's above about 5 degrees, I will go and do the field work. I do spend the winter and kind of early spring, late fall, doing some of that prep for the field work portion. But the field work portion I will do kind of throughout that season. I'm busy enough that I will fill up that season with mapping. I do adjust, and one of the challenges on the big projects is making sure that map is consistent. If I've started the project in May, I've gone through July, August, and I've mapped all the way through, and I'm finishing it up in November. There's a lot of different seasons where the vegetation is going to look different, and it does take experience to make sure that you're mapping consistently. And it might even take a second pass to just double check and make sure that everything is consistent across the map, because that's one of the biggest sources of issues for folks, is when they go through the first part of the map and then halfway through the course they've switched to a part that was, all of a sudden the map isn't consistent, and so they're not sure how to interpret this part of the map. So that consistency across the entire project is really, really important. That also applies to if you've got 2 or 3 mappers working on different parts of the same area. that again, you have that consistency across the map, and that there's communication between the different mappers and an agreed upon kind of set of, okay, how big are the rocks that we're going to put on the map versus, this one doesn't make the cut type of thing, right?
One thing that's worth mentioning is usually LiDAR data is taken in the late fall when all the leaves are falling off the trees and before snow has hit the ground. So if you're just using kind of automated LiDAR, no drawing maps, they'll be the most accurate late fall. Sometimes I've tried projects before where I've got a map that looks great when I'm there in November, and then I go back out in, I don't know, May, and it looks nothing like what the LiDAR shows. So yeah, as Jeff said, get out in different times of year and see what those changes are like.
It's an interesting point that you brought up, Matt, about the LiDAR being taken in what they call leaf off conditions. So sometimes it's also early spring, but oftentimes, yeah, it's kind of late October when they fly that, so they get the most what they call penetration, and you can get the most accurate picture of the ground. But what you see is when you're using tools that can kind of auto predict or guess at what the vegetation density is, the different levels of green, it's often underrepresented on those auto-generated maps because they were taken with that leaf off. And so you have to compensate for that. And again, when you're doing the field work, you're going mostly based on what you see out there. But if you're doing any of those, the auto-generated, or you're drawing and you're trying to do some of the drawing without the field work, you do want to take that into account. But I guess to most directly answer the question, I would create a map that my goal is to create a map that can be used in any season, and it's sort of an average of that. And yeah, you might get longer grass in the summer and shorter in the spring, but I'm not going to create a map that needs to be updated multiple times a year to accurately represent that, because that's not practical, right?
Okay, excellent. And recommend people take a look in the chat. And there's a comment from Eric Kemp in terms of simplification, and Eric's one of Canada's top runners, and top mappers, so it's a nice balance there. With that, I'd like to wrap things up. Really want to thank everyone who came out. Thank you to the Ontario board for helping with logistics behind the scenes, especially Chris Kaczynski did a great job. Special thank you to Orienteering Canada, Charlotte McNaughton, for helping us get the webinar set up here. As well, I'd like to thank the other provincial associations and national associations that help promote this. Video is going to be put up somewhere, and the slides will be shared as well. Major thank you to both Matthew Barrett and Jeff Teutsch. As I said, if you have questions, mappers tend to be really good in terms of answering them or giving you advice. Please reach out. And if you're interested in orienteering or adventure racing this season, please reach out to Orienteering Ontario. With that, we'd like to wrap things up and see everyone in the woods sometime in 2024. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks all.